You're listening to CKUA, and joining us right now is the Chief Conductor of the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra, Alex Prior. He's here to chat about the upcoming concerts, Nielsen's Indistinguishable.
In something, yes.
Nielsen's Inextinguishable. This is coming up on Friday and Saturday, March 6th and 7th at the Winspear Centre. It's being called the highlight concert of the entire ESO concert season. I'm excited to get into this with Alex. Alexander Prior, welcome back to CKUA.
Thank you.
It's
nice to be here.
Such a treat to have you, and I know that everyone's very excited about this concert. Can you tell us why people are feeling this is the concert of the season?
I didn't know that they were, but I agree with them. Because it's such a good piece. I mean, all the three pieces actually on the program are wonderful. Sort of really monoliths of great music. The Nielsen is a bit of a party piece of mine, the favorite. Maybe that's why it's kind of it's a piece I've done a lot of in various countries in the world. And by the way, one of those orchestras, I won't name which, did type it up as the Indistinguishable Symphony on their poster for the concert. So like for realsies, after having checked it, which I kind of enjoyed. But it is in fact very distinguishable. It's and very distinguished.
Right.
It's kind of a manifesto of everything that Nielsen stood for as an artist. And what he stood for can be summed up in his famous quote, music is life, and like life, inextinguishable. I almost said indistinguishable there. But it's a really great quote. I think it's a way to live. It's a way to be a musician, and it's certainly the way to interpret his music. And it was written, during the First World War, during some pretty dark times for Denmark, for Europe. And many artists responded to that. Many artists I love, like last week we did Webern's Passacaglia, and artists like Webern and Berg and many others responded with heartbreak and mourning. And of course, we need that kind of catharsis as human beings. Sometimes when we're feeling sad, the best thing we can do is listen to sad music. But Nielsen's approach is exactly the opposite. He said, no. We're going to say, go away to evil and to nastiness, and let's make positivity by making it, by leading by example. So the piece kind of chooses to inspire us, to infuse us with a love for life, a kind of a wind in the hair, heck yeah, life is great. Let's enjoy it. Let's embrace it. And you really feel that in the piece. It's not particularly long, but it's so compact, so dense, so infused with really exciting, rich melodic material. Though sometimes it's very cozy. Actually, and the second movement it's four movements in one. There's no break, but the second movement is so sweet and tender and gentle and kind of you just see a Danish little family Christmas gathering or something with candles and yummy food and words that are impossible to pronounce. And by the way, inextinguishable in Danish. Usløglige. It's a really how do I put it? A very lyrical word. Very beautiful. Usløglige. And
the word was really important to him, right? Like he really wanted to find the right word to summarize what he was trying to express with this, as I understand it.
Yeah. I mean, it really is the right word. I mean, can you extinguish it? No. So it's inextinguishable. It's really it is. It's like this motor, this Ferrari motor of music. The composer, I always think people love to class composers by their geographical.
Right.
So you always hear Bruckner and Mahler, and you always hear Sibelius and Nielsen. And neither Bruckner and Mahler nor Sibelius and Nielsen have anything really to do with each other, except for that they lived in a similar-ish time in a similar-ish part of the world. Though Finland and Denmark are really, really different countries. Finland is much more like Russia culturally, not politically, but culturally very sort of dark and enjoying that darkness and lots of bathing of very hot or very cold but not in between kinds and Denmark is it's a flatter country. It's a much less wild physically country. It's a much sort of cozier, more farmed, more populated per square mile country with a much more sort of chill way of life. And I love both countries, but they're very different. And so Nielsen is nothing like Sibelius, but what he is like Beethoven. I always think the composer that Nielsen is the descendant of, the artistic sort of descendant of, is Beethoven. With this, I'm sure many listeners will appreciate the sort of the, if you think of and then it goes this motor just non-stop, like sport mode. I like my sport mode in the car. I drive now. So and as you press the sport mode, and then it's like that oxygen infused, like high power motor, and Beethoven has it, and Nielsen has it, and it's a technical thing in some ways, just the ability to keep writing things that follow on from another without break, and have that intensity. But it comes from that zest for life, that love for life. And so I find myself leaving Nielsen, kind of wanting to go, a performance of a Nielsen is wanting to go woo, and just like run, and I never run. My goodness, I never run, but it makes me want to run, and just get things done. It's kind of almost New Yorkie in that way. It's like,
it's funny because the symphony just starts with such an incredible. It just grabs you. It's one of my favorite beginnings ever, but it's also one of my favorite endings ever.
Yeah.
When I think about it, everything in the middle just kind of keeps you right
kind
there.
of also favorite, for me too. And the opening sometimes has been described, I can't remember whom by, but I remember reading, it's like as if the piece was already going and you just happened to turn the radio on at that moment. And that's exactly it. It's like it's so exciting. There's no introduction or getting into it. It's just happening. And it's really sort of honest. And there's these wonderful every time I do a piece by Nielsen, I mention this, but there's this wonderful collection of photographs of Carl Nielsen. Pulling Faces. Have you seen those?
No.
Oh, you have to see those.
Okay. Well, we'll find those. We'll put them up on CKUA's social media.
When he was sending his friends, that's a good idea. When he was sending his friends gifts, Carl Nielsen, and this was apparently normal at the time. Right now, this would seem egocentric, but you have to remember that photographs were fairly rare and expensive things.
Right.
Carl Nielsen, this is before the Fourth Symphony even, he would send people pictures of himself as a birthday present to them, but the pictures, and that was apparently a fairly standard tradition at the time. But instead of sending nice formal photos, he would pull the silliest faces. I mean, we're talking full on, like 3-year-old toddler making the silliest face they can. And I think it's so charming because here's this serious composer, this heart of Danish art, and they're such wonderfully silly photos, and they show such a sort of an ability to laugh and at oneself and at life and to be happy, and you hear that in the music. So I always think that it's really reflective of his music, and it's in a very Danish way. There's all this lightness and positivity and kind of coziness, the hygge, the famous Danish hygge, the coziness, but behind it is something quite profound. When you get to the end of the symphony, you feel sort of transformed. You feel like through energy, through humor, through positivity, you discover an inner kindness that is greater than you knew you had in some ways, or that humanity had as a whole, as a collective. There's a sort of an inner human kindness that comes out in that the end. It's this just ultimate positivity. Positivity is so big that it kind of creates its own gravity, its own gravity. That's how it seems to me.
And is that how you feel you've conducted this before? How you feel at the end of it?
Yeah, it just feels like one massive epic cuddle, just a massive epic cuddle, a pan-human, pan-national, pan-cultural, pan-everything, pan-demographic cuddle. So we can all cuddle together in the Windspear, metaphorically speaking.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that so much, Alex. This is such an incredible piece, and it's rare that people get to hear it performed. I think too rare, but I just want to take a moment to talk about the instrumentation that's going to be present. It presents lots of challenges, of course, this piece. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're approaching this and who you've got doing it?
It's mostly just a big romantic orchestra, but as you rightly point out, there is a big surprise at the end. Do we want to give away the
I don't know. It's up to you. You're the puppet master.
Yeah, we'll give it away just for CKUA listeners.
Okay,
Don't tell anyone else. Tell them about the concert though, which is he uses, usually in an orchestra you have one set of timpani, but
the big old kettle drums.
Big old kettle drums, yes. Though whenever I hear kettle drums, I just want a cup of Earl Grey tea. But I always order Earl Grey tea, and everyone in Edmonton always looks at me like, "Really, you want Earl Grey tea?" Like, I'm not kidding. Yes. Anyway,
it's the bergamot.
The bergamot is the only kind of tea I like. No, it's not. It's the only kind of traditional tea I like.
Right.
I love me some oolong too. Anyway, on that very important note aside, yes, he uses these big kettle drums, timpani, as is normal in an orchestra, like everyone uses in that era, plus a second full set on the other side of the stage, only in the last movement. So suddenly in the last movement, you get this battle of the drums. It's totally out of, some American, like college movie, in a way, like this kind of like dude, like my drums are bigger than your drums, man, like bruh, except for that it's really great, and they just like duke it out, they're one is pounding away and the other says no, I'm here, and in some ways it can come across as kind of fun and positive and exciting and cool. I think there is something bigger to it. It has a hint of military to it, a hint of detonation, and so behind this, of course, you have to think of the context of when it was written. There is some real darkness. It's not that Nielsen was burying his head in the sand. It's not that he was pretending everything was fine, because it really wasn't. But he was choosing to overcome that. Or to try to overcome that, at least, and to use the force of life in music. And so, yeah, they battle it out, but in the end, the beautiful tune wins, and that's kind of a really great moment. And, if you're going to do tonality in the 20th century, because the 20th century, of course, has a huge history of tonality disintegrating and becoming more and more atonal, especially by the time he was writing this. But he's like, no, I'm going to really be tonal. It's a proper tune that you can whistle home with a big major triad chord. It's like unapologetic, and I love that. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. What an incredible, I just kind of feel like, as you say, it's kind of everything about life.
Yeah.
Puts it all in there in an unfiltered way. And then the fact that you get out of it, this amazing feeling at the end is it's just so incredibly affirming.
Oh, it gives me chills every time in the best sense. And then, just so much endorphin.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about who you've got working with you on this? I know that.
Yes. So our soloist for the program is Robert Uchida, our beloved, wonderful concertmaster of the orchestra. This week he takes the solo stage, as he does with us fairly often, and we're so lucky that. Well, first of all, we're lucky to have him because he's the most extraordinary concertmaster and musician. But we're also lucky to be able to hear him in this solo capacity. In fact, from here, as we do this interview, I'm going next to a rehearsal with him. We're preparing more in advance than you usually would with a soloist in a traditional orchestra setting. We're meeting in advance and having an extra rehearsal so that we really find, even more than usual, our kind of mutual common interpretation of this piece, because the Sibelius Violin Concerto is a piece that he adores, that I adore, and that, of course, audiences adore. It's one of the more performed pieces of music in the world. And if you don't know it, if you think you don't know it, you know it. You just you may not realize you know it. It's kind of out there in the popular psyche. And so the positivity with that is that, of course, people want to hear it, and that's great. The negative with a piece so popular, it's like doing a Beethoven 5, actually, is that people have such a preconception of exactly how it should be performed and interpreted.
Right, of course.
And I remember talking to him about a year ago about this, how there's a few spots where everyone does it on the G string or fortissimo when it doesn't say either. And I'm like, oh, and I hadn't even realized, having looked at that score for years and years and years, because it was so ingrained to me, the traditional performances, you add it when it's not written. So we're kind of, in a way, going back a little bit to the original. We're kind of trying to blow a little bit of dust off the book, fetching the old beloved book out of the family cupboard and blowing the dust off and seeing what's really there. And also, I'm always inclined to perform that piece and any Sibelius with a hint of folkloric approach, of folk music kind of just being somewhere there in the consciousness. So, for example, in folk fiddling, you can allow the down bow to be louder. That's how you get the kind of tila
right.
feeling. And so just allowing that to permeate the music on occasion. It's still a classical concerto, but just a whiff of that is very welcome. So we're gonna just lean ever slightly that way. But fundamentally, Robert is one of the finest musicians I know, with such attention to detail and care for music and such a gorgeous sound. It's big and it's big and muscly, but also very dark and sophisticated.
Right,
sound.
It's kind of wistful somehow.
Wistful is a good word. It's a great word in general, but it's absolutely the right word for for that. It's going to be an amazing performance, I think, of the Sibelius Violin Concerto, unless I do something to get in the way, which is entirely possible.
Like, to borrow a phrase from late night infomercials that I grew up watching, that's not all.
And that's not all.
Tell us about what's rounding out the program.
We open the evening with Kaya Saariaho's Ciel d'hiver, which is an orchestral piece.
Winter Sky.
Winter Sky.
Right.
Sky de Winter. And it's basically a piece that sounds like a winter sky. I listened to it driving back from Jasper last night, and
Wow.
I had a sky roof. What do you call it?
Oh, wow. Right.
The thing that rolls back in the
Right.
car. The roof that makes a loud noise, and then you know the one.
I do, yeah.
And it was a bit cold, but I put my hat on, and I just thought I'll drive with the with the sky. It was beautiful. And I was,
Skylight?
in the car, the thing that
Right,
comes
yeah,
open.
I know,
The open-y bit
Right, the
that
open-y
some
bit.
cars have. And the one you press the button and then it goes and it opens and then it's open. Because before it was closed. And then well, anyway, so I drove back and I listened to the piece with the mountains and the stars and stuff, and it was so appropriate. And kind of it has this very silvery kind of quality, very subtle and introspective in a way, but very poetic. It's like a watercolor. Instead of having a massive big oil painting, this is a very sort of gentle watercolor that's very tender and expressive and beautiful, but not with a thick layer of paint, which is the opposite to the Nielsen. The Nielsen is, Jackson Pollock throwing it on, sloshing it on, just buckets of, and I like that. But sometimes the opposite approach is just as beautiful and meaningful. And she's just a terrific composer. She's one of the more in-demand, successful living composers. Also Finnish. I thought it'd be fun to have another Finnish piece with such a well-known, maybe the most well-known Finnish piece of music. To have a less at least in Alberta, well-known Finnish composer. It's also part of our initiative to have a female composer on every main series program of the season.
Yeah, that's kind of a quiet thing that, I've noticed that.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that, being sort of headlined or billboarded as like, this is a cool thing we're doing, but this is a cool thing you're doing.
I think it's a cool thing. We've mentioned it's a cool thing. It was kind of my idea. I wanted to do it. And it's... I didn't want to make too much of a PR fuss about it because it shouldn't be a big deal.
Right.
It shouldn't be a big deal. And there's two aspects to it. One, women write some of the most beautiful music out there because they're half of people, roughly. So
Right.
of course they're going to, right? That's one thing. And two is that women have suffered a historical injustice in, amongst other things, classical music, where really until the 20th century, they just hardly any female composers of note because they weren't allowed to write. There are some, but they persevered through incredible prejudice and systematic suppression, institutional suppression. So there's a degree of, we really should do this, like a degree of it's time to compensate for some kind of, or not some kind of, for very real appalling behavior on men's part for, a good, millennium. But the even better reason is that some of the most beautiful music out there happens to be written by women. It's just so beautiful. And Saria was one of the great female composers. And there's so many female composers that are amongst my favorite that we haven't featured this season because the slots got, filled up really quickly and that we will hopefully feature in years to come. And another interesting thing is that, of course, a large proportion, much larger than with men, of great female composers are living because of the history. And therefore, it's another opportunity to present music of our time, which I think is very important because we have to be a living institution that reflects values and society of today. And also it means you can have a contact with a composer in a way, of course, you can't with a dead composer. It's always fun to ask questions, to say, is this really what you meant? How would you like this?
What? Do you do that?
I do sometimes, yeah, and
Wow.
you can't ask that of Nielsen or of Sibelius, and that's really special, right?
Yeah.
So all in all, it's a great thing, and she's a great composer, and the piece is very beautiful. It's really quite simple too. It's just this very quiet, very reflective, almost static. That absolute stillness that you can get on a really cold, wintry night.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
there's a bit of wind, and the wind is not hard, but it feels so loud because it's been so quiet, and it's just so beautiful. She's actually a spectral composer. Spectralism originally developed as a way, a new technique of writing music by which the inspiration, the source for the notes used, would be taken from the electronic analysis of a particular note. So say you had a recording of a bell you particularly liked, a bell in some church in rural Russia. You'd record one note of that bell, and then you'd analyze the spectrum of the note on a computer. I've dabbled in this, and it will show you which notes feature. You know how every sound is usually, unless it's a sine wave, is usually actually a collection of different notes of different pitches. Just the main one is the loudest, and then you hear the other ones. So if you dampen some of the other ones, suddenly the note sounds quite different. You know, it's like in your car stereo, you can do this a little bit by taking down the high or the low pitches, but this is more surgical, the specific exact resonance and pitch. So you analyze the notes of an interesting sound, a sitar chord or a bell strike, and you take those notes, you write them down, having had the computer analyze them, and you use those notes as, okay, these are the notes I'm going to use in my piece.
Wow.
So all the piece is made up of the sound of, you know, this particular bell or this particular whatever it is. That was the original spectral composition. And then, of course, like with all, you know, sort of technical ways of writing, that soon begins to disintegrate. Like 12-tone composition, really in its pure form, didn't last that long.
Right.
People started to use it. People started to diverge. Go, these are the main notes I'm using, but I'm going to do something else, but it's inspired by that. And then it just became a sound world and a style. So she was, I think, more of a pure spectral composer. Now she's not so purist in her spectralism, but it's still from that sound world. So you hear kind of the hidden tones of nature expressed in the orchestra, and that's kind of really gnarly and rad. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I can't wait to hear it. And Alex, I'm going to think of you tooling down the highway from Jasper and looking at the winter sky through the sunroof, as the word just came to me. That's what we call it around
the sunroof.
here. Sunroof,
yes.
yeah.
Can I just say, I felt yesterday, I just took a day away. I just needed to get into nature, and I thought, how lucky we are to be in Alberta. I'm sorry to sound a little bit sucky-uppy here, but it's just such a beautiful, magical part of the world. I thought, how wonderful. And so suiting to this program, actually, this week. But yeah, I went, where did I go? I went to what I like to call Malignant Lake.
Malign Lake.
Yes,
yeah.
and there was no one there. It was a little bit scary because, you know, you never know when there's literally no one there. But it was just so wild, and I felt so in touch with something so primal and human. And yeah, we're very lucky to be here, aren't we? I've always known it, but I realize it more and more with every year. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. And one of the reasons I love being here is the cultural scene too. And this
one
weekend,
of the best orchestras around.
Absolutely. And March 6th and 7th, a lot is going to be expressed about life and about life in Nordic climes, among other things. If you go and check it out, the Inextinguishable, among other things, is going to be on offer as Alexander Prior and the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra will be presenting this concert.
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, one of my marketing people told me to tell you that there will be a surprise appearance featuring Lady Gaga. I can't say that that's actually true, right, but I was told to say it. So just so you know.
It's unconfirmed, but it's out there.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, great. Alex, it's always such a joy. Thank you so much for being here.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
He is Alexander Prior, the Chief Conductor of your Edmonton Symphony Orchestra.